Hi, I'm Patrick. I make videos talking about stuff I've been reading. I'm a Christian who loves theology, so today I'll be talking about Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. I read this copy. Um, this is a really good book. This book had come very highly recommended to me. Um, I had heard that this was one of the biggest influences for C.S. Lewis, who I love. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors. So yeah, I was had high expectations for this book, and it was really good. Just a brief summary of this book. It's sort of it's I guess a part two, you could say. At least as far as I understand it, he wrote a book called Heretics before this, and that book was kind of uh, criticizing many of the other popular philosophies of the day, or just sort of a negative argument there, like attacking other sides. And there was a critic of him that said, "Why don't you make a book defending your own beliefs?" And so that's what this book was. So this book is almost it's almost less of him arguing for his beliefs. And I think I might have kind of went wrong by going into this book expecting it to be more of like a standard apologetics or something like that, where someone's just kind of laying out a case for what they believe. But this is really more so of like a almost like an intellectual autobiography, where he really just takes you on a journey of like where his mind went throughout this whole process of him starting off as a kind of agnostic, not really knowing what he believes, and then just coming to these conclusions, and it all just pointing him to Christianity, to Orthodox Christianity. And yeah, so again, I kind of went in this book. I had heard that like when he says Orthodoxy, he's talking about like the Apostles' Creed. So I went in this book almost. Again, I didn't really know what to expect. I think I was almost expecting like a almost like an exposition of the Apostles' Creed, defending every line or something. But it's nothing like what this book was. This book was, um, again, kind of like a very autobiographical. So yeah, um, in the first chapter, um, he points out, or he says that he came to these conclusions. He came on this journey, and he says he doesn't call it his own philosophy that he had found out, because he sees it more as a discovery than a creation, because rather than him coming up with his new system, all of his conclusions led him to what was already there, what Christianity had already been saying for thousands of years. I just thought that was a beautiful way of putting it. Um, so yeah, in the first few chapters, he's really just talking about kind of his mental journey with these other popular philosophies of the day, with like materialism. He talks about how, and again, this book is it's full of these just extended metaphors and these images. Like in the second chapter, he talks about these different like lunatics, and like what drives them crazy. He like personifies these philosophies. Says that what drives the lunatic insane is not believing in miracles or him being too mystical. It's him using rationality. It's rationality that drives people insane. It's the the materialist mindset is not necessarily, it never goes wrong in its logic, but it still leads to insanity. That's the argument he makes. It's like it's yeah, sure, it sounds like a good idea, but look at where it ends up. So again, like he goes through that, and the third chapter is titled "The Suicide of Thought," and that's one where like he specifically goes through just all the different popular philosophies at that time. Um, Here's a quote that I really liked. He talks about how people's humility in this time has completely shifted to the wrong way. He says, "Modesty has moved from the organ of ambition. Modesty has settled upon the organ of conviction, where it was never meant to be. A man was meant to be doubtful about himself but undoubting about the truth. This has been exactly reversed. And then later on he says, the old humility was a spur that prevented a man from stopping, not a nail in his boot that prevented him from going on. So he talks about how, like, in the modern era, the humility, it used to be you're very humble about yourself. You're very unsure about your own thoughts, but you're sure about God, or you're sure about what it is you believe in. You're sure that that's true. But he says in his day, like, that's completely flipped, where now it's, I'm sure about myself. I'm sure about, the logic that I've come to, but I'm not sure about exactly like what I believe. And again, it says that this is just like completely self-defeating, and it ends up in insanity. That's his argument. And again, he just draws these beautiful images, and it really just kind of takes you on a journey. And again, it is like him kind of taking you on a journey through his own mind, how he ended up on those places. But yeah, I really liked his critique of like pragmatism, just saying that like, oh, like these people saying like, oh, whatever works, that's what, whatever is good for people. And he says, what's the best for people is what is the objective truth. Again, that's just one example of like the several critiques he makes, but I really like that one. But yeah, going on, chapter 4, he kind of gets to a point where he's saying he hasn't quite come to belief yet in terms of like where he's at in his journey. But here's a quote that kind of summarizes the chapter. He says, I felt in my bones, first, that this world does not explain itself. Second, I came to feel as if magic must have meaning, and meaning must have someone to mean it. There was something personal in the world, as in a work of art. Whatever it meant violently. Third, I thought this purpose beautiful in its old design, in spite of its defects, such as dragons. Fourth, that the proper form of thanks to it is some form of humility and restraint. We should thank God for beer and burgundy by not drinking too much of them. We owed also in obedience to whatever made us. All this time, I had not even thought of Christian theology. Again, I think it's just beautiful how the way he frames it, as like he's coming to all these conclusions, coming to all these discoveries, and it's just leading him to what was already there, just uncovering, just discovering what has been there for thousands of years, which is Christianity. Yeah, and then in chapter 5, he starts to kind of critique like Stoicism and this like Quaker view of like the inner light, that there's like a God within all of us. And I like this quote he makes that critiques that. It says that Jones shall worship the God within him turns out ultimately that Jones shall worship Jones. So again, he just makes this argument that what we worship must be outside of ourselves. Yeah. I'm just looking through my notes here. I apologize. All my videos are just very unscripted. I'm just looking through like what I wrote down about the book. But so then chapter 7, he's talking about like what people think like this like utopia would be like. What's the modern like what is the morality of the day saying, like what our ideal should be. He talks about how some people, I think he's talking about, kind of like moral relativism, where it's saying like, well, what was right now might not have been right 1,000 years ago. He says, but it does frightfully matter how often humanity changes its ideal, for then all its old failures will be fruitless. Just saying like, if we don't have something concrete, if we don't have something that's permanent, that we can keep as our goal, then what we were striving for 1,000 years ago, if it's a different ultimate goal, all of our efforts were fruitless. And you just have to say that all of human history was just doing something in vain. And what about now? Your own efforts are going to be vain later on. But again, I really like this quote where he talks about how Christianity solves this problem. He says, I had said, the ideal must be fixed, and the church had answered, mine is literally fixed, for it existed before anything else. I said, secondly, it must be artistically combined like a picture. And the church answered, mine is literally a picture, for I know who painted it. It's just, again, all these images and just the way he writes, the way he sees his own journey, it's just beautiful. Um, and yeah, the chapter 8, he's talking about the so-called liberals of his time, or like free thinkers. And he talks about how it's actually more, the man is more free if he's able to believe in miracles rather than if he rejects all the miracles. The freedom from believing in miracles is much lesser than the freedom to believe in the miracle, which I really like the way he looked at that. And then he also contrasts Christianity with like some of the other like Eastern religions. And here's a quote: by insisting specially on the immanence of God, we get introspection, self-isolation, quietism, social indifference. Tibet. By insisting specially on the transcendence of God, we get wonder, curiosity, moral and political adventure, righteous indignation, Christendom. So yeah, he this whole time he's just been showing that like the final result of all of these other philosophies, all these other religions, is just chaos and just disarray and just ruin. And that Christianity, like, it solves all these problems. And he answers this objection in chapter 9, where he's like, well, someone might say, okay, sure, Christianity, answers these questions. It answers, it ends you up in the right place, but that doesn't mean necessarily it's true. And the way he answers that is he found, I'll read this quote too. The Christian church, in its practical relation to my soul, is a living teacher, not a dead one. So he talks about how, like, Shakespeare, he might set your soul on fire on one of his writings. He might, speak to you, very, very deeply, teach you something big, but he doesn't know you. He can't speak to you today. He's not going to give you, once you've read all of his stuff, that's it. But the church that God has given us is a living teacher. It's with us. It speaks to us directly. It's involved in our lives, and that's his argument. It's like, okay, yeah, this is true. It's a living teacher. But again, yeah, what a beautiful book. It kind of, honestly, when I first finished this book, which was earlier today, so like I think my opinion on it has literally changed throughout the day. I think at reading this book, it was kind of hard for me. I will say, one, I think just because of like how different it was than I was expecting, but also like I think kind of the way my brain is very like practical and like concrete and logical, and he's very abstract and uses all this imagery, and he's not making like an intellectual argument. It's really, honestly, it's just full of like appeals to just your humanity and just what is like the desires of your heart. What does your soul lead you to? And he just talks about how it all points us to God and to Christianity. But yeah, this is a great book. I can definitely see how C.S. Lewis was definitely affected by this guy. So definitely gonna take a break from Chesterton for a while, just because again it was like, not that it was very laborious to read, but like I'd like to read something more concrete next. But anyway, thanks for watching. If you're here, God bless.